Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.
Now, let's look at what the IMF is saying regarding the removal of fuel subsidy and the forex reforms that have happened in Nigeria. So the International Monetary Fund has expressed concern over Nigeria's implementation of social measures that are intended to cushion the effect of subsidy removal and the unification of the foreign exchange rate. And according to the IMF, these efforts are unfolding too slowly. They also highlighted the pains that many Nigerians are going through having to make ends meet because the cost of living has really increased. Now, let's find out what our guest thinks about the IMF's position on the social, you could call them palliative, or some of the social initiatives by the federal government to cushion the effect of subsidy removal and the unification of the exchange rate. Joining virtually this morning is Dr. Yele Okeremi, and he joins from the U.S. Dr. Yele Okeremi is a Precise Financial, is the MDC of Precise Financial Systems Limited, is a finance and business analyst. Good morning.
Listen, it's good to see you again.
Good to see you too. All right, Dr. Yele, you heard me talk about the IMF's position on some of the social reforms by the federal government that were social measures that were actually intended to cushion the effect of subsidy removal and the unification of the exchange rate. Now, many times when economic analysts have spoken about some of the reforms of the federal government, they have, in their analysis, pointed fingers at the IMF for being responsible for some of the reforms implemented by the federal government. But like I said at the beginning of the show today, that when we say things generally and they say in local parlance, catch your sob, it is saying that the IMF indeed caught their sob and responded to it, saying that there are some deep-rooted issues in Nigeria, and then they say that some of the social measures seem to be taken off too slowly. Do you agree with the IMF on this? Do you think that they exonerated from the challenges that have come from some of the reforms of the federal government?
Well, thank you, Blessing. So first of all, let me say that there's an adage that who feels it know. And that suggests that even when you go see a doctor, it doesn't matter how smart that doctor may be. The patient is the custodian of the physiology of the body. And the patient needs to understand how to manage herself. We've seen situations where people have gone to see doctors. Yes, the doctors understand a whole lot. They know the pharmacology, they know the physiology, and then they prescribe drugs. And then, you know, patients take the drugs and they are reacting in adverse manners. So the same thing happens when you consult IMF and the World Bank. They might say certain things. And I always say that because of who they are, you don't want to say no outright to them, but every nation has the right to moderate what the IMF or what the World Bank says. So when you look at the prescription, so to speak, of the IMF in the past, it's been very clear. And I think the way they've prescribed some of the things that they want the government to do, they've prescribed them like laboratory, like it's a pure science thing, not recognizing the fact that social sciences is very different from pure sciences. And in social sciences, the human beings matter, and human beings are not predictable totally in terms of the way you look at how they do things. And so, you know, so sometimes when certain things then begin to happen, I will not be surprised if the World Bank and IMF begin to exonerate themselves. I think we ourselves haven't played smartly enough to understand that, yes, some of the things that the IMF, in fact, some of the things that they are talking about may be inevitable, but it is necessary for us as a country to understand the other nuances, the other issues that surround the well-being and actually the prosperity on the long term of the nation. And mind you, there are two important factors that limit the capacity to create wealth in any nation in the world. The first is abundance or existence of natural resources. That's when you talk about resource-based theory, we can talk about that. And then secondly, which is much more importantly, the value system that galvanizes society together. And these value systems are determined by the leadership of the nation. Now, the bottom line is that when you look at these two things, Nigeria is not a shortage of any of them. We have abundant resources, and we have people who can make things happen. I think the biggest challenge is that the way the value system is where we really are missing it. So I've taken a look at a number of the things that the federal government has done, a lot of things. So take out this fuel subsidy, take out forex subsidy. Yes, they may be inevitable, but what you have done inadvertently is that by those those policies, you have turned on like a switch the cost side of things. Automatically, the cost side of things jump without necessarily providing the capability of the production base of Nigerians to be able to earn commensurately, to be able to meet those required or minimum required costs. And that's why you can see that at this particular point in time, Nigerians are choking on their own medication. And I think that's quite dangerous. And in my opinion, what the World Bank is prescribing is absolutely necessary at this time. The government needs to take a look at some of these policies and find a means of creating stopgap measures that guarantee that the people, the nation that you are hoping to make prosperous is not dead before the day that you are expecting prosperity.
Now, before the federal government did remove subsidy removal, or let's even come to this current administration when it was announced on May 29th that subsidy was gone, the regime of subsidy was gone. Now, Nigerians panicked even at that very day. The effects started to be began to be felt as some fuel stations that had sold petrol in the early hours of the day had just halted the sales of petrol. So there was panic around. But there was some explanation that removal of subsidy would save the federal government $6 billion annually, and that this would actually be put into other sectors that really needed funds from the federal government. Now, according to the national president of the Independent Petroleum Marketers Association of Nigeria, asked at that time in 2023, Mr. Yele Okeremi, he said that with the removal of subsidy, that for every liter of petrol, it could cost as much as 750 naira, but the pump price was likely to drop to around 500 naira if the government encouraged the central bank to provide forex to marketers at the official rate. Well, we did see that petrol price in some parts of the country dropped to around that 500 naira. For some, it was a bit over that. But today, petrol is being bought at over 1,000 naira. If we look at what he said, if the federal government encouraged the CBN to give forex to marketers at the official rate, then the cost of PMS would drop. Did this look like there was no consistency in that plan? And that's why we are where we are today.
Now, let me explain something to you, and this is quite interesting. I'm an engineer, and lots of times when we work in the industry, when we are designing systems, we get to a point when we say that the professors, if they came to take a look at what we are doing in the industry, would frown at some of the practices that we are employing or deploying, simply because from an academic standpoint, it doesn't look efficient to academicians. But as practitioners, we know that if we tried or attempted to bring what the professors prescribe in class, the system will fail. So same thing is what we are talking about here. The fact that, yes, subsidies, it's true. I agree that if you want efficient markets, because what you are looking for is efficiency of the market. So if you want efficient markets, of course, remove subsidies. And when you remove subsidies, because subsidies are capable of distorting markets, particularly when the subsidies are not appropriately monitored. Subsidies are not necessarily bad. Let's get that clear. And every nation that is responsible actually applies subsidies at some point in time. However, I'm going to say this as a conclusion, that subsidies must necessarily be applied on a short term and in a directed manner to guarantee ultimate prosperity at the end of the day. So when the oil marketers were asking for, oh, why don't you allow the forex to be given to oil marketers at official rates? What's the meaning of official rates? Essentially, they are asking for subsidies. And yes, there's a way to look at it. If you did that, perhaps it's possibly true that the price of petrol might be a lot cheaper, because in truth, the reason why the price of petrol today is over 1,000 naira is largely due to the forex markets. So, for example, if you based the forex at about 800, I promise you that the price of petrol will fall by about 50% as well. However, when you begin to subsidize certain sectors, then the same challenges that we had in the past may occur. Because when you look at the criticisms of the subsidy regime, what they said was that, oh, there was corruption, it was difficult to manage. So the moment you bring that in, you are going to run into trouble. And so perhaps what the other alternative might have been is, how do you ensure that if at all you wanted to apply subsidy, that the subsidy is applied in such a manner that it gets directly to the consumers of petrol? And then, of course, there's the counter argument that, oh, if you did that, then, of course, the subsidies will go largely to richer people who have 5, 7, 6 cars, who are just buying fuel guzzlers, and they're just doing some of those things. And therefore, you might then want to say that, okay, perhaps the way to do it is guarantee that it doesn't matter whether you have a car or not, public transportation becomes efficient. But you see, while it is possible for Mr. President to make a statement on the fly on the inauguration and say subsidy is gone and it becomes a policy and everybody complies, it is impossible, even magically, to create the road networks and provide the vehicles or trains that will begin to move Nigerians. That's a project that's going to take a long time. So these are the issues. So you do certain things that become effectual immediately, and the other parts of it that could have balanced it are things that are going to take you maybe 5, 10 years. So this is the trap that the federal government has found itself. And clearly, to my mind, there is an urgent need for some, I won't necessarily say backtracking, but it is compulsory if we are not looking for serious challenges in the country. It is compulsory that we look at a way to guarantee that the majority of Nigerians can breathe.
The director of the IMF's African department, during a press conference, Abibi Selassie, actually did say that a better job can be done at rolling out social protection, particularly for the most vulnerable in Nigeria as a result of the subsidy removal and the reforms that has come up regarding the exchange rate in the country. But if we also look at some of the social measures the federal government said it would implement to cushion the effect, one of them is the cash transfer, which the IMF too was in favor of. Looking at how that has gone, the cash transfer and even the support for farmers, do you think these are done at a very slow pace like the IMF suggests? Are they effective so far?
Well, again, those are interesting prescriptions that, I say, can only be adopted sparingly and in the short run. And I'll explain why I say so. Because, look, if you are the CEO of an organization or the president of a nation, because the same principles apply, you want to guarantee leverage. You want to guarantee that you are deploying resources to where you can get maximum results. I appreciate the fact that guaranteeing social stability is compulsory. That's important because if you go to the Constitution of Nigeria, it states that the welfare and the security of Nigerians is the first and most important thing. However, if you continue to throw cash at unproductive people, so what you are just doing is essentially going to drive up inflation. However, there are things that could also be done. I'm saying that necessarily because of the situation with Nigeria, necessarily we may have no choice but to do some conditional cash transfer because we are at a particular point in time now where, like I said, Nigerians are finding it very difficult to breathe. Even those that we thought in the past were reasonably well to do are finding it very difficult to breathe. However, I think part of the things that the government, that I need to see more from the government is what is the strategy for development? So, for example, and there are so many things that can happen. For example, we look at the other things that the country is deficient at. Housing, for example. Country is deficient at housing. Suppose we roll out en masse housing projects that are funded by the government and guarantee that the artisans that are working on those sites are Nigerians as well. So these are the kind of things that you can deploy money to that have what I call the requisite and the required multiplier effect on the economy. So when you do that, you are getting, first of all, putting money there, you are beginning to build infrastructure. Secondly, you are creating employment. Thirdly, and most importantly, you are creating capacity for the future. And then, of course, to capital, you are creating a situation that guarantees some level of social stability. But again, like I said, if you did to do some of these things requires careful planning, and they are not going to happen overnight. So even if the federal government suddenly said today that we are putting $6 billion behind housing, I don't expect the trickle down to be immediate. However, if the federal government worked hard at achieving some projects in situations like that, in specific industries, either agriculture, like I said, construction, technology, you would see that perhaps within a year, within 6 months to 1 year, we might begin to see some positive things that are beginning to happen as a result of the productivity of Nigerians. So the bottom line is that, look, you are telling me as a Nigerian that I must buy petrol at international prices. And actually the power tariffs today, in my opinion, in fact, I'm going to check, I think it's probably more expensive than what they are getting in Canada. The power tariffs in Nigeria, the people in Band-Aid, the unfortunate ones in Band-Aid, like me. Now, you are expecting me to pay at that, yet an engineer or a medical doctor or a lawyer in the United States is making maybe sometimes 200x what I'm able to make in Nigeria. It's not adding up. So the bottom line is that the situation is that the government must necessarily guarantee that, yes, if we want to pay international prices, then we must be able to guarantee that Nigerians can earn internationally competitive wages by doing productive work. And not just by merely saying minimum wages, X amount of money.
The IMF director for Africa also said that when subsidies were significant and exchange rate was kept artificially low, there were other issues within the Nigerian economy that was fighting against its growth. if the federal government has removed subsidy and has come up with an exchange rate reform, which now seems to be biting the Nigerian populace very much in terms of a rise in cost of living, is there a better approach to have handled this? And for the underlying issues the IMF are referring to, how can they be tackled?
So, like I said when we started, on the long run, what we are looking for is efficiency of markets. All right? And if you are looking for efficiency of markets, then of course you won't talk about removal of subsidy, because efficiency of market is talking about the efficient allocation of resources at the end of the day. So you want to remove subsidies. And that's why I said, in theory, yes, you must do that. But in practice, when you take a look and you do your gap analysis, where you are to where you want to be, which is having completely free and fair markets, I think certain understanding would tell you point blank that I cannot effectually jump into those things right away without either of two possibilities. One, massively borrowing externally, or two, your ability, either some act of God, some war happens in the Middle East, and the only thing, because Nigeria right now, the only thing we are selling is oil. So the price of oil, becomes might be $300 per barrel, and you are also able to increase your production to get your OPEC quota. Then, of course, if that happened, then a number of things begin to fall in your favor, because you are able to earn more foreign exchange. And if you are able to earn more foreign exchange, then of course it will affect your exchange rate, and in which case it will affect some of these prices. But failure to have these two possibilities is the guarantee that you are going to run into trouble in the short run. And that's exactly what we are seeing. Major trouble in the short run. Yes, I agree. There's a way the Yoruba people say it, that when you roast, an animal, when the animal is well roasted and dry and everything is fine, it's delicious. But before that animal is fully roasted, what are you going to eat? That's the situation that we are really in right now. In the interim, there is a possibility of a major challenge in the country if we don't take responsible steps.
The major reasons for the hike in prices of goods and services is the exchange rate. And looking at what the IMF says, artificially keeping the rate low. We saw sometime this year how the rates began to drop. That happened for about a month when the Naira was even said to be the best performing currency in the world. And after that, the Naira fell again. And today it trades at around 1,700 Naira to the dollar. In the interim, looking at the implications or the effect of the Forex reform, should there be some sort of intervention by way of artificially managing the exchange rate to make it low?
Now let me state something point blank. It's unsustainable for you to artificially decrease the price of your currency, except you artificially decrease it to be undervalued. That you can manage, like China does. In which case, you have the capability to produce a whole lot, and yet you deliberately say that your currency is undervalued. You can do that. So what's going to happen is, like, you are producing so much. I mean, you have so much water that you are producing in your tank, and you are just releasing little. So what's going to happen is that your storage is going to be full. But it is impossible for you to decree an artificially low exchange rate, except you have very high reserves to cushion it. And that's why I said, if your reserves are high enough, perhaps you can do it for a reasonable period. You are defending your currency with your reserves, all right? But when your reserves are depleted, then you're going to run into serious trouble, all right? So, however, I also want to say that the markets about currency, about anything, are not necessarily pure sciences. They are social sciences, and they are not driven necessarily by the reality of production at all. They are driven by demand and supply, and demand and supply is driven by sentiment. So, for example, at the time you were speaking about, when we saw the exchange rates improving to the point that people said it was the best performing currency. Yeah, because for those days, the rate of change of the exchange rate in favor of Nigeria was quite high. What happened was that it was sentimental because the central bank governor made certain pronouncements at that time, and people saw that it seems that this man is going to see these things through. And the moment that happened, the sentiment was that, oh, I must not hold too much because the ones that I have held in the past, let me just give it out now because the central bank governor seems to be declaring war against me. And that's what happened at that time. But of course, after a while, when people saw that, oh, look, doesn't really look like we are able to sustain this, then the same thing happens. So for me, for example, I mean, I personally think that the Naira is undervalued, but that's a different conversation that we can have. But it is undervalued as a result of the sentiment, because when you look at the price of your currency, so to speak, it is dependent so much. We call it, you know, the demand for money. We talk about the transactions demand for money. We talk, which is money that you need to actually do things right away. We talk about precautionary demand for money, which is the kind of money you and I put in our pocket. We know there's a way we say it in my local parlance that, if I run into an XLR, you know, so that I can have money that I won't be embarrassed. But that amount of money, which we call precautionary demand, is not usually a lot of money. Then the third demand for money is what we call the speculative demand for money. Now, speculative demand for money is a game of my feeling. If I feel that keeping the money in cash is valuable, so I can hoard money, I can hoard it in my house. So the speculative demand for money can be anything from zero to anything. And I think a lot of the value of the Naira today is determined by this speculative demand for money. There are so many people that are actually betting against the Naira today. You take a look at a lot of people, even people that are earning, you know, $1 million a month. When they get their salary, the first thing they want to do is to go and convert to dollars. Why do you want to do that? You see people today, they are holding dollars, 5,000, you know, 10,000, but if you aggregate it, it's significant because they feel that the dollar is a safer currency to hold than the Naira. And these are the kind of things that are really affecting the exchange rate. However, like I said, my conclusion is that it is impossible for you to artificially hold your currency to be strong. Because after a while, when you run out of your reserves, your currency is just going to devalue and become like tissue paper overnight. That's something you don't want. No responsible central bank governor ever wants to be in that situation. So it's better for the central bank governor. You know, they don't really care whether the exchange rate is high or low, but they want stability. And that's what is a lot more important. We want to be able to have a stable currency where it is predictable, because when you do that, then it is easy for either the entrepreneurs, the producers, manufacturers, and even investors to plan appropriately. You don't want volatile currencies. And these are very important things. So I think trying to hold Naira at an artificially low exchange rate is a non-starter.
You've been able to weave in the factors and how they relate. First of all, you built the case of how subsidy would lead to borrowing high external debt. And then if the value of the Naira was to be upheld artificially, that would deplete the reserve of the country after some time. Now, this takes us to the second conversation, which also comes from the IMF saying that Nigeria's foreign debt level will reach 25% of its GDP by the year 2025, which we're just months away from. We'll talk about that after this break. But stay tuned.
Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.
The program is still Early Exchange, and we're looking now at the IMF's warning to Nigeria about its external debt level reaching 25% of its gross domestic product by the year 2025. Before the break, we talked about IMF saying that the federal government's social measure as response to the removal of subsidy and some forex reform is quite slow. And we have Dr. Yele Okeremi, who is a finance and business analyst, responding to the IMF's position on the reforms taken by the federal government. Now, let's look at the warning of the IMF to the Nigerian federal government that by the year 2025, the country's external debt would rise to 25% of its GDP. Already, the data from the IMF's regional outlook for sub-Saharan Africa showed that Nigeria's external debt to GDP rose to 22.7% in October, rising from 11.9% in 2023. Nigeria currently is not subsidizing petrol. What could you say as some of the reasons why Nigeria is having an increase in its external debt? From 11.9% in 1 year to 22.7%. That's more than double.
Now, you see, Blessing, you have to be very careful when you are discussing percentages. And I always say that to my students when I'm teaching, that percentages, if you do not unpack it properly, may confuse you. So, for example, straight understanding of what has happened, the jump from 11.9% to about 23%, can be explained merely by the fact that the singular decision to devalue the currency brings down your GDP reasonably in dollars. And then your external debt remains the same. So you see that even if you didn't take any penny at all externally, by the fact that that devaluation happened, that figure has jumped. But for an untrained eye would say, oh, they've borrowed more money. So you can see that dynamic. I'm just explaining that dynamic to you. However, I think it's important for us to see that, yes, the ratio will increase. And remember, I said this earlier, just in the earlier segment, that part of the things that the options that remain available to the government to ensure that, first of all, the forex market remains stable and it actually attains appropriate levels is external borrowing. I told you that there were two options. It's either one, external borrowing, or the better one is your production capacity increases. Either you are now producing other goods other than oil, other goods and services, or like I said, the price of oil jumps and your production quantity also increases, then you have a lot more money. If you anything outside those three are impossibilities. And therefore, if you take a look at those three, whether the price of oil will increase, the federal government is not in control of it because oil is a commodity. The prices are determined in London. Federal government has no control over that. Secondly, whether we can increase productivity, because quite all right, again, even that one is also in jeopardy because there's an OPEC quota that is given to you, which you are not expected to go above. Yes, I know we have some headroom because we are not producing up to our quota. So federal government needs to necessarily ramp up so that we can actually produce our quota. So that's the second option. Then the third option is borrowing. It's inevitable. However, and I said this, borrowing is not necessarily bad. Borrowing is not necessarily bad. It's about what you are deploying the borrowings to do. If you are deploying borrowings to do things that give you more money than the cost of the borrowing, then of course it makes a lot of sense to borrow a lot more. But the challenge is, are we doing that as a country? Are we using external borrowings to do smart things? Or are we financing lifestyles? As a matter of fact, are we financing what I call bureaucratocracy? Because what I mean by bureaucratocracy is a government of the bureaucrats, by the bureaucrats, for the bureaucrats. So the people that are bureaucrats that are in government are the guys that are enjoying their lives feeding fat, while the rest of the Nigerians are probably not having a good enough time. So if we are taking external borrowings to finance bureaucratocracy, then of course the results in the future, because essentially you are kicking the can down the road if you do such a thing. But theoretically, external borrowings is a fantastic and viable option for the country to be able to attain stability of markets and get the forex rates to expected or desirable levels.
In a
I
situation
think
like
we've not borrowed
this,
enough.
what are the options open to the federal government of Nigeria in trying to manage its external debt? Do you think that some form of debt restructuring can be done? Let's also look at the creditors.
We are not at that level at all. 25% of GDP, that's nothing. We are not at the level of restructuring. We are not choking. I mean, I'm not saying this is the best. What's the ratio of America's debt to GDP? It's over 100%.
Same capability as the US have to manage its debt at this point.
Look, the difference between the US and all other nations that you see is because the US basically owns the world's reserve currency, which means that they borrow in their own currencies. And because they borrow in their own currency, it's difficult for them to default, because it means that even if, push turns to shove, they can print the dollars to pay back their debts. Nigeria doesn't have capacity to print dollars. That's the only difference. All right. But again, I say this, that debt and creditworthiness are also games of perception. Haven't you understood that people who don't even need money are the ones that people want to lend money to? Why? It's a paradox. The people that need money, people will not lend money to them because people are worried about their capability to repay. So these are all things that we need to do as a nation. What narratives are we presenting? And what activities, what actions are we doing? What are we showing? Look, I've said this again and again. I run a company. I don't beg anybody to do business with me. You do business with me because you have a problem and I have the solution. So why should we go about begging people? The same with money. Money will find its level at any point in time. Anywhere people see the capacity of money to multiply in a safe manner, they will bring their money into that country. So there's no need anybody gallivanting around the world begging for foreign investment. It's a waste of time. You put your house in order, guarantee that when people bring in money to your country, the money will multiply. Then you will see money coming to your country. So as far as I'm concerned, Nigeria's perception is still not where we want it to be. And that makes our creditworthiness very, very low. And that's a problem. So it means that even when we borrow money, because you see, when we look at the pricing of debt, it's also based on what you call, in Nigeria, you call it the MPR, the monetary policy rate, plus what we call a business risk premium. And we also look at financial risk premium. So these are the things that determine the ultimate price or the ultimate rates. This is something that plays in international markets. So if your country is not so credit worthy in the eyes of the lender, yes, they probably will lend you money, but then the maxim is high risk, high return, because they perceive it to be higher risk than the expected return, which is in this case, the rates that they're going to be charging is going to be higher. But if we put our house in order, then you realize that people are going to bring money, and we can actually get as close to the monetary policy rate as possible. So these are the issues that I see on the table.
All right, as we wrap up, let's look at what we should borrow for, or what Nigeria should borrow for. This is 2024 coming to an end, and it's about time for the 2025 fiscal budget to be presented. What we've observed when budgets are presented is that recurrent expenditures takes the chunk of what is being budgeted to when compared to capital expenditure. Now, you've said it's not about borrowing, but what the borrowings are used for. How can Nigeria employ some fiscal discipline to ensure that if they're borrowing to show up whatever deficit the budget is going to have, there is a plan to pay back?
Now, you see, let me say this. It's about the value system. The best managed companies, and I'm not saying they are necessarily going to be the most successful companies, but the best managed companies are owner-managed companies. Do you know why that is the case? Because the owner is expected to have the best interest of himself when he's taking decisions about the business. The same thing applies to nations. The best managed nations are nations where the sovereign, the leaders of the nations, personalize the goodness of the nation over any other thing. And such people, and that's why you see such companies, private companies particularly, because they are not in the stock market where they have to report every 90 days. They are able to take long-term decisions in the interests of the organization. The same thing applies to nations. So like you said, in Nigeria today, look at the ratio. You see more than 70% a lot of time in recurrent expenditure. That suggests automatically a lot of wastage, which is what I call bureaucratocracy. It suggests that they just pay money to bureaucrats who probably don't even have any KPI. Nobody's monitoring what they do. What promises have they even made that we know that they are even monitoring? And as a matter of fact, it gets worse because those figures are actually very, very distorted. Because embedded in what you call capital projects are the monies that they use to buy those SUVs that you see. Because for a lot of those SUVs that you are seeing, a lot of those unnecessary and frivolous overseas trips are financed as part of capital projects. So you realize that you have very little to really do anything that has multiplier effect. Remember, we spoke about this in the earlier segment when I said the best way to deploy resources, you deploy resources to areas where you are going to have the higher or the highest multiplier effect. So at the end of the day, you are just deploying pitons to things that can actually lead to development, and you are expecting development. What are you expecting? That's insanity. These are the issues. We need to put on our thinking caps, and we need to be disciplined, and the leadership must be Spartan by themselves to the point where we know that any money that is spent on maintenance and recurrence is because that money is being spent to guarantee that we are producing multiples of what they are working with. Yeah, we don't need to say this. Take a look at the public service. What's the quality? You have a lot of people, lots of offices, lots of, people who are there virtually do nothing. As a matter of fact, it gets worse. Not only that, if they were doing nothing, perhaps it would be better. But people are working at cross purposes. So somebody is pushing, the other person is pulling, and you are paying both of them. And then we are expecting the country to go forward. No, these are the real challenges that we are facing. When we get serious about guaranteeing that we are deploying resources to places and to areas where the multiplier effect in terms of productivity will be highest. And we put in just a little bit of narrative to it. Then you begin to see a lot of things happening. Nobody's going to beg any diaspora to come. The diaspora will come back en masse. It happened in India. Not only will the diasporans come en masse, the foreigners will come and make Nigeria their home because they realize that it's a good place to be. Their money will multiply and there's security of their investments. So if we did some of these things, then Nigeria can develop. But as long as we are practicing bureaucratocracy, we have a very long way to go.
We do hope that that long way will be cut short by methods that would improve the economy, so the economy can grow. I see you smile, Dr. Yele Okeremi. It's the wish of every Nigerian that the economy gets better, so that the story that we have that a bag of rice now sells for between 105,000 naira to 130,000 naira would be a thing of the past. Thank you so much, Dr. Yele Okeremi, who has been a guest on the segment of the show, looking at the IMF's recommendations to the federal government, its assessment of what the federal government of Nigeria has done regarding social measures to cushion the effects of subsidy removal and the forex reforms, and what it is saying about Nigeria's debt. Well, you say 25% is still manageable. Well, let's see if the federal government can do better by even reducing that. Again, thank you for being on the show.
Pleasure is mine. Yes, and have a lovely week.
Same. We'll draw the curtains here on today's edition of Early Exchange. I am Blessing Eichie. If you missed any part of the show, well, we've got you covered in that. Once you get to our YouTube channel, then you can watch the show all over again. But one thing that you can do is to expand the conversation from this table and throwing it open to you now. You can leave a comment, and when you get to our social media platforms on Facebook and Instagram, on X at SOUQ News TV, which is the handle, please like, share, and leave a comment. The show continues tomorrow, 8 a.m. West African time. For 11, it will be time for Market Insights here on SOUQ News TV. Enjoy your day.
Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.